Welcome to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the PulpNet, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines, since 1996, online at thepulp.net. This Pulp Event podcast features author and screenwriter John Wooley and John Gunnison of Adventure House, who discuss the thrilling detectives. The talk was recorded on August 13th, 2015, at PulpFest 2015 in Columbus, Ohio. Here is John Wooley.
This is John Gunnison. I'm John Wooley. We're doing a presentation tonight on the thrilling group Detectives. You want to go ahead and point at that book? We seem to have a few copies left of Thrilling Detective Heroes that you did back when?
Oh, God,
back
it was
when the earth cooled, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like 2008, 2009 or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll find here. 2006.
Boy.
Time flies.
That's right. One of the things that we wanted to do, because we're talking about Leo Margulies and also Ned Pines, and when we were asked to do this panel, I talked to John and I said, look, it seems to me the thrilling group, that did Thrilling Detective, Popular Detective, G-Man, all of those, was like PRC or Monogram, if you know your Poverty Row Studios. And PRC and Monogram a lot of times would get the characters that had been big, right, at one point. Charlie Chan started out with big studios, ended up at Monogram. Michael Shane, Philo Vance. And it was kind of, got people on the way up and people on the way down as far as actors went. And John said, really, that wasn't what it was. And John used, since we're doing metaphors, John used a baseball metaphor. Would you explain that?
Well, what I was trying to say is that baseball in the 50s and 60s, you had teams that were really first division. You had the Yankees, you had the Cardinals, you had the Dodgers. And you had those teams that had all the money, and then you had the Washington Senators, and you had the St. Louis Browns, and you had the Kansas City Athletics, and there was a division between those teams, almost like a division between Street and Smith, which was definitely the top line publishing house. Then you had Popular, then you had Thrilling, and then you can put all the other titles in whatever row that you want to, including, if you want to throw in, obviously, Munzie and Clayton and all those other publishers that really didn't make it very long after the Depression. Obviously, Munzie lasted longer than that, but you had companies like Clayton and Hersey that didn't make it out of the Depression very far.
Well, the Thrilling group liked to pick up as much good stuff as it could, as cheaply as it could. And John, I think this is a good time. We were talking about the 10-cent pulps. Can you go into that just a little bit?
The magazines prior to, first of all, let's look at this from a viewpoint of, I know we have a tendency to romanticize the pulp magazines. That it was all rosy.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, and the fact that it was a business. And these guys were there to make a profit. I can still remember at PulpCon's past where Harry Steger was saying, we canceled Dr. Yen Sin because we found out that the words meant in Chinese the sex act. And I'm saying, okay, no, you canceled it because it wasn't making money.
Right.
All right, so all these companies were there to make money. And when before the stock market crash, you had magazines 20, 25 cents. They were paying their authors good money, as much as 5 cents a word or more. But then the stock market crash came, and it all came to a crashing halt. And I was struck with a comment that Harry Steger said many years ago to me, and we said it to the audience here at PulpCon. And he said that, when he first put out his 4 magazines in 1930, October 1930, they were all 20-cent magazines, and he wasn't making any money. He used to have a back exit out of his office. So when the creditors would come in the front door, his secretary would let him know, and he'd go out the back door, and they would shoot pool down in the pool hall until the creditor got tired and left. Well, he said it wasn't until Dime Detective came along that suddenly we were making money. Well, and we all thought, well, great, Dime Detective, it's a great magazine, great authors, great stuff. Really, when it comes down to it, is they cut their price in half. They went from 20-cent magazine to 10-cent magazines. And that's where the difference was. And it was thrilling that decided, well, let's go all 10-cent magazines. So when they started in 31, everything was pretty much 10 cents. And everybody else started going, oh, wait a minute, you know, The Shadow was 10 cents, and that sells 300,000 copies a month, or an issue, and Argosy sells, you know, 300, 400,000 copies a month, and that's 10 cents. And they suddenly started going, oh, this makes financial sense. So it was thrilling, and it was this aha moment that John Locke had in the foreword in the Thrilling Detective Heroes, that he said, well, yeah, they were making money at 10 cents. But what that meant, though, is they weren't paying those rates anymore.
That's right. So that meant that they got a lot of rejects from really good writers. They got stories that maybe weren't quite, for some reason or another, didn't fit with popular publications or some others, so they ended up with a lot of stories from good writers that were sort of secondary stories or weird stories or stories that didn't quite fit the formula, which was fine. Now, a lot of times these stories were published under house names, but sometimes they were also published under the real authors' names. I think the house names, John and I were talking about this, probably the house names, the writers, I guess the writers could call that shot, so maybe they wouldn't devalue their own brands, perhaps?
Right, well, you know, in some cases the other publishers weren't going to publish a Bellum, you know, because he's just too synonymous with spicy, so, you know, you don't want to devalue your brand and thrilling, if that's possible.
Right. That's a short putt, isn't it? Well, but people like Roger Torrey, who was also in Spicy, and Cleve F. Adams, one of my favorites, really underrated guy, I think, and detective guy, W.T. Ballard, Robert Leslie Bellum, Robert Sidney Bowen even, wrote under their own names for the Thrilling group of detective pulps. Now, Thrilling had lots of series characters. We were able to get a few in this book, but I'd like to briefly talk about 4 of them that John Locke and I decided would not make it. Now, one of them I think is probably, and let's see, that's the first one, isn't it? Very good. You are a tech weenie.
Oh,
I'm so proud of you.
no,
Good
that's...
job. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Oh, sorry. All right. So, let me ask you a question. This is not interactive necessarily, but there is one detective hero from the Thrilling pulps that probably appeared, mostly in popular detective, more than any other detective character in the whole run of Thrilling pulps. Anybody got an idea who it is? All right, I'll give you a hint. How about if I talk about the writer, Joe Archibald? Oh, I heard somebody go, oh yeah.
Popular author.
The guy's name was Willie Clump.
Yeah, with a name like that, he had to be good.
That's right. Willie Clump had a detective agency. And more to the point, Willie Clump was one of those guys who, you know, in mainstream literature, if something would start up, a lot of times the pulps would sort of co-opt it for their own. In this case, it was Damon Runyon, the writer Damon Runyon of Guys and Dolls fame. Started that whole Broadway sort of sassy, kind of, not quite criminal element, but some criminal element. And they're first-person stories. They're using a lot of slang. They're doing really what strikes us kind of as a little precious today. And some people may remember Hugh B. Cave's The Eel that he did for the Spicy Group was very much along those same lines. First person and also present tense. Now, Willie Clump wasn't present tense, but to give you an idea of the Joe Archibald style with Willie Clump, things have been going badly for Willie. This is from the story Yegg Stains from Popular Detective, October 1938. The last fee he had garnered had gone into a small stack of very prettily engraved certificates that announced to the world that William Clump was the owner of 200 shares of capital stock in the Hold Tight Handcuff Company. The stock salesman thereupon lost no time in hopping a ferry to Madagascar. Consequently, Willie was as devoid of legal tender as a whale is of feathers as he sat in his office late one morning. This is the kind of thing, this was obviously very, very popular. Archibald, was a huge pulp guy, did all kinds of war stories, all kinds of stories, aviation stories. But we decided not to use Willie Clump because that stuff just didn't seem to us to wear very well. It was, as Raymond Chandler said about his early career as a poet, Raymond Chandler said, "I found it easy to be precious." And that's kind of how we felt about Willie Clump. Now, I will have to say, however, that there's a great story, Willie Clump story from August 1939, and John says this is too esoteric. You be the judge. There was an August 1939 Willie Clump story in Popular Detective called "Dumb is the Word for Willie." Now, that is a knockoff of the 1936 movie that got a Academy Award nomination for Gladys George, called "Valiant is the Word for Carrie." And it's also the knockoff of a 1938 Three Stooges comedy called "Violent is the Word for Curly." Well, there you go. At no extra charge, information you can never use. The other, and I never pronounce this right. Will you pronounce this for me, John?
Bill Baron Munchausen Tolliver.
Bill Baron Munchausen Tolliver. This was by Curtis T. Gardner. Named after that literary character. Some of you know there is the Munchausen syndrome, which is a little bit of a different deal, but it's based on the same thing. The Baron Munchausen character was a congenital liar. And it's based on this German nobleman, Hieronymus Karl Friedrich. Friedrich, thank you. Put the long I on it. I'm from Oklahoma. And this is from The Exciting Detective, which was one of the shorter-lived pulps of the thrilling group. And Baron Munchausen was actually an investigator for the Imperial Casualty Insurance Company. And he told all these big, long, windy stories that really had no basis in reality, and then he went out and solved crimes. The third one is a guy named William Donald Bray wrote him, and he comes from Thrilling Detective, and his name is River Joe. Anybody know River Joe? River Joe is called the clever sleuth of inland streams. River Joe has a floating second-hand store. Now, apparently this is in upstate New York, as nearly as we can tell. And he is kind of a defective detective almost. He comes from 1938. We were talking, that's about when they went to the
Thrilling Mystery,
Strange
Strange Detective
Mysteries came along. So here's all you need to know about River Joe. For River Joe, who walked a little stiffly and with a slight limp on land, had the grace and agility of an otter or seal in the water. This wasn't a miracle. There was a very simple reason for this startling difference. Joe's lower spine had been injured in a fall. On land, the weight of his upper body pressed down on the injured vertebrae, making him a little stiff, but the water bore his weight up evenly. The pressure was relieved from his back, and he had his full strength and suppleness. That is The Clever Sleuth of Inland Streams, River Joe, by William Donald Bray. And the final guy we didn't have only had 2 stories, but he's one of my favorite of the thrilling detective heroes. His name is Jig Hacksaw, Song Sleuth.
They can't make them up like that anymore.
He was in 2 popular detectives in the 1940s. He's a jukebox technician who solves crimes. And the way he'll put the jukebox records in, the way he knows if it's going to be a hit or not, is if it makes his feet will start to do a little jig, and that's why it's called Jig Hacksaw. I really fought to have him in the book. Didn't happen. So, a few of the more intriguing ones we had in the book I'd like to talk to you about a little bit, John and I. One of them is Dr. Coffin. Now, Dr. Coffin, we see some nods to Dr. Coffin. I did the introduction for the book that John Locke did for his Off-Trail Press back, 2008, 2009, a collection of those stories. Dr. Coffin, Pearly Poor Sheehan, who's pretty well-known writer from the early 30s, late 20s, had these in Thrilling in 1932 and 33, and his character was Dr. Mortimer Coffin. Now, Dr. Mortimer Coffin was Hollywood's most famous mortician. In Hollywood, everybody was famous, including the morticians. And he presided over the funeral of a man named Dale Manning, who was called the Man of 500 Faces.
Yes, he was half the ability of
Lon Chaney.
of Lon Chaney,
Right.
yes.
The Man of 500 Faces. Well, the thing about it was, Dr. Mortimer Coffin was actually Dale Manning, and he changed his face to become Dr. Coffin. And Pearly Poor Sheehan never really had a timeline on all of this, but Dale Manning faked his own death. You see, Dale Manning, Lon Chaney, one syllable, two syllable, one syllable, two syllable, right? I think this was inspired by the horror boom of the early 1930s. Frankenstein, Dracula, all of that. First couple of stories, there's like a whole group of freaks, of circus freaks, who helped Dr. Coffin fight crimes, which, of course, would have been at the same time the movie Freaks came out. Of course, the movie Freaks, Todd Browning's movie, which had real circus freaks as the protagonists, did not do well because it was way ahead of its time. Has anybody seen Freaks? It's a great movie. It's a great movie, but it's way ahead of its time.
It's freakish.
It's very freakish. Thank you. And so I have a feeling that Freaks, Frankenstein, Dracula, all of these things, the horror boom of the early 1930s, influenced Pearly Poor Sheehan to write the Dr. Coffin stories, which were really pretty popular. You got the next one?
Unfortunately, we don't have all the images that we had arranged for. We're looking for the 1237. That's October. So this would be hopefully, nope, that's not 12 or 37. That's later on. Looks like one of the Nick Ransoms.
That's fine. We'll
Okay.
just keep it up there until
Okay.
we'll get to it. Dr. Feather was a character by Ray Cummings. Now, we know Ray Cummings. Science fiction fans know Ray Cummings. Detective fans know Ray Cummings. Very prolific man. One of those guys, kind of like, John O'Hara, maybe, if you look at American Letters, who started with like his best book and then sort of never had anything come along that was that good. That was Girl with Golden Atom. Girl in the Golden Atom, excuse me. Dr. Feather was this little bird-like professor who was in Popular Detective. But there was another guy that was in these stories named Uncle Tubby, who was basically the Oliver Hardy to Dr. Feather's Stan Laurel. And Uncle Tubby was in not only detective tales for popular publications, but also in thrilling wonder stories. I don't know, now I haven't made an exhaustive search, and you guys may know this better than I, but I think this character was the only character to appear in the science fiction magazines and the detective magazines. The same character. He had science fiction adventures in thrilling wonder. He did detection in detective tales. I don't know if there's anybody else that's ever done that before. That was, of course, a Ray Cummings character. All you need to know about Uncle Tubby is the final line from The Dead Man Screamed, which is the story we have in the book. Scientific mathematical proof is very convincing to juries. Dear me, yes, it certainly is. There's there's Dr. Feather.
Yeah.
Tells you all you need to know.
Then forget buying the book.
That's right. That's right. Then we want to talk about also Mr. Finney. Do you guys know Mr. Finney? Any costumed hero fans out there? They didn't have a lot of costumed hero fans. They had the Purple Mask, which we don't have in here, which was a real creepy character. They also had Mr. Finney by Benton Braden. Did 7 stories of thrilling detective between 36 and 38. He was a costumed hero, pretty stereotypical. Had a wisecracking butler, a mystery woman that helped him, and whenever he was getting ready to fight crime, his face would set into hard granite-like lines. That's pretty much it. Although he also took the identity of a guy, one of the great pulp names, and there's a lot of great pulp names, but he also took the identity of an underworld character named Jobber Leg sometimes, and that's right, Jobber Leg. Are you going to look that up to make sure I'm right? Yeah, it is Jobber Leg. That's leg with 2 G's, for those of you keeping score at home. And we don't know a lot about Benton Braden. We do know that he created and
That's
wrote...
the author, Benton
Yeah.
Braden, yes. Okay.
That's correct,
Yeah.
the author, as opposed to Mr. Finney.
Right.
Yes, we already said that. You need to be paying more attention. We do know that he created and wrote another detective character named Willie Brann, who was known as the goober-eating gumshoe, a guy who apparently was addicted to eating peanuts, not unlike Michael Shane later on. And that was in Thrilling in the early 1940s. Just jump in here whenever you want to, John. We don't know much about Milton Lowe either, but we do know that he wrote 2 novelette-length stories about Baghdad Hobo Detective. Now, Baghdad Hobo Detective was in Popular Detective in the late 1930s, and the reason we have him in the book is because John Locke, my co-editor, is just nuts for hobos. If you know his work from Off Trail Press, if he's got a hobo story, it's going to find its way between the covers of an Off Trail Press book.
And there was Hobo Stories.
Yes, it an entire Hobo Stories collection. And actually, that's good hobo. I mean, if you like that, as a friend of mine used to say, if you like that sort of thing, it's the sort of thing you'd like. But one of the things about Baghdad Hobo Detective that I really like a lot is that it even within the stereotypes, like we were talking about, John.
Right.
It is a stereotypical thing, but it also sheds a light on the Depression era and what it was like to ride the rails and what it was like for these people. And you were talking about how they would use stereotypes to show things.
Well, in all popular culture, you have stereotypes. The TV shows, you have certain stereotypes for characters so that you can immediately generate, some sort of agreement with who that person really is before they even open their mouth, almost. But it's the same thing here in this particular story because the hobo detective is always riding the rails. And this is a Renaissance man who obviously doesn't brush his teeth, but for some reason he's able to solve crime. And this one particular crime that's in the book is fat cat bankers. Now, tell me a fat cat banker that anybody reading a pulp story in the middle of the Depression wouldn't instantly hate. Mm-hmm. So when the bankers start to get knocked off, there was joy to be had.
That's right. Good time was had by all. We don't know much about Milton Lowe, who wrote him either. Wrote Baghdad Hobo Detective. We think he may have died in the war because after the early 1940s, he doesn't show up in the pulps anywhere anymore, as far as we know. I want to talk about now one of my favorite characters, and that's Dr. Zing. Do we have any Dr. Zing fans in the audience? Do you guys know Dr. Zing? Really worth looking up. Dr. Zing, or Dr. Zing, how would you say that? C. Lin, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, was a wartime character, popular detective. And there were several of the Dr. Zing stories. He was supposedly a crime fighter named Dr. Zing, but he was actually a WASP who had been born to missionary parents in China, who was pretending to be Chinese. And he had a real Chinese helper.
So I guess, in other words, he looked like Warner Olin doing
Yes.
Charlie Chan. He didn't really look Chinese, but that's okay.
More like Roland Winters doing Charlie Chan, actually, yeah. But he did have a real Chinese servant.
Mongolian.
Lai Hu Chao, yes.
Okay.
Who had lost a leg to the Japanese, which turned out to be a good thing, not necessarily for Lai Hu Chao, but for Dr. Zing, because he had a fake leg that he could put stuff in. So one of the
It's like
adventures-
Batman always seems to be
Yeah.
able to pull out just the right
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, only this time he was pulling it out of his leg.
Well, better than
Right,
another
yeah,
agent.
exactly. And so he pulled out, at one point, he had a radio transmitter in his fake leg, and that proved to be very helpful in one of their adventures. He also would put weapons in his leg, and he just could put pretty much, I guess, he could put anything in his leg he wanted to.
Dr. Zhang invented all of these false legs, and so he would sit there and when they're about ready to leave to fight crime, he would pretty much tell his Mongolian assistant, I'm trying to remember.
Get
the
that
exact-
leg on.
Yeah.
Get that stuff in that leg. Yeah, he would. And Will Murray was very helpful in our study of Dr. Zing, because what happened, E. Hoffman Price, and I'm quoting you, Will, please tell me if we're wrong, but E. Hoffman Price did the first Dr. Zing story, and in November '41, it was a standalone, allegedly. It's going to be Will told us it was written as a one-shot, and then along comes the Office of War Information, who is encouraging people who are creating popular culture to create things that made our Chinese allies look good. And one of those things would be Dr. Zing. And so Ballard and Bellum, W.T. Ballard and Robert Leslie Bellum, writing together as Walt Bruce, wrote a series of Dr. Zing stories during World War II for Popular Detective. Now, at this time, Bellum and Ballard had adjoining offices in a Pasadena, California office building. And they would work separately on their stuff, but they also worked together. And as I recall it, one of them, Bellum was good at storytelling, but he wasn't good at long form. Ballard was good at long form. So one of them, I think Bellum, would go to dictaphone and tell a story, and then Ballard would come and flesh it all out. They did that not only with Dr. Zing, but also with Jim Anthony's Super Detective. Those Super Detective books in that particular time period were also written by Ballard and Bellum. One of the questions which I have, which will never be answered, I'm sure, is whether or not Robert Leslie Bellum was jealous of W.T. Ballard, his collaborator. Now, the reason I bring this up is because W.T. Ballard, was all over Popular Publications, which was right up. Well, you've said that Popular wasn't Street and Smith.
No.
And Thrilling wasn't Popular.
No.
But W.T. Ballard wrote the Bill Lennox books, stories which some of you know, for the Hollywood Detective, for Black Mask. Bellum's Hollywood Detective was in a definitely second-string pulp, which was, although he was paid well for it, but he was they were in the Spicy Detectives and the Speed Detectives and the Dan Turner Hollywood Detectives for a time, and a couple of times in Private Detective. But it was a much, on the echelon of pulps, it was pretty low down. And I know from Tom Roberts' letter he showed me, some correspondence from Bellum. Bellum was trying hard to break into Popular Publications. Specifically, he was trying hard to break into the
Dime or Black Mask.
Well, no, he's trying to break into Dime Mystery or Terror, one of the Terror Tales. And he had actually said, I'm going to try and write these stories, these weird menace stories. I didn't call them that, but that's what they were. And I'm going to try and pitch them to Dime Mystery or Terror Tales, pitch them to Harry Steger, Popular Publications. And if they don't sell, I'll sell them to Spicy Mystery. They didn't sell to Popular, and he sold them to Spicy Mystery. So my question would be, was there any jealousy between Robert Leslie Bellum and W.T. Ballard, the guy that he worked with? I'd really like to know that. I'd really like to know if he resented the fact that Ballard could sell to Popular Publications pretty much at will. And he couldn't. He could never crack that market. He always had to stay in the secondary markets. Do you have the time? We don't want to run over. I don't know if Will came in because he wanted to hear it or if it's about time for him to be on.
9:12.
Okay, all right. What do we go, 9:20? Is that all right?
Yeah.
9:20? Thank you. Okay, thank you. So, moving right along here. The other character that was in the Popular pulps from Bellum was a guy named Nick Ransom. Now, Nick Ransom was he's been described as a Dan Turner Hollywood detective clone. He was a former stuntman who became a private detective and worked kind of freelance for the studios, like Dan Turner. Dan Turner was not a stuntman; he was just a detective. But he actually started out about 6 months after Dan Turner Hollywood Detective started out. Dan Turner, of course, was in the first issue, in the issue of Spicy in 34, and Nick Ransom was in 10 Detective Aces for Ace in December of 34. Now, he later on, he sort of bounced around. He was in Detective Dime novels, he was in Red Star Detective, he was in Double Detective throughout the late 30s, early 40s. And then he doesn't show up again until 1948. And that's another question I have. We were talking about that. Why that gap? Why did he revive
And the only thing that
character?
when you start talking about 41 to 48, you can immediately think Army service or something along that line. But I don't know. I don't know Bellum as well as you do.
Well, he had a good formula. The Dan Turner movie, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, did the Dan Turner movie Blackmail from Republic come out in 48, 49, somewhere in the late 40s, certainly, with William Marshall as Dan Turner. And, maybe there was that. I know, for instance, when some of you have read the essay about Dan Turner that S.J. Perelman wrote called Somewhere a Roscoe, which appeared in, what was that, New Yorker? Was that New Yorker, I believe? I can't remember. And then he was going to just write a novel just off of that. So anything that perhaps could expand his markets. And in 1948, the pulps were not in great shape. Maybe he had a backlog of stories. I have no idea why he revived the character, or why he started the similar character, Nick Ransom, in the first place, except he found a formula that he could do, and he did a good job of it.
And if you have not read any Nick Ransom or read any
Dan Turner?
Dan Turner, you definitely have to find some of that stuff to read.
Let me tell you a personal story. 5 minutes. It'll be a short personal story. When I was in graduate school, I took a course in detective fiction, and the first time the professor got up, he said, well, we want to start talking about hard-boiled fiction now and how it was begun by Dashiell Hammett. And I raised my hand, trying not to be the kind of person we all sometimes think we are when we know about pulps. And I said, well, actually, that was begun by Carol John Daly, and Race Williams' character was really the first hard-boiled detective. Well, he wasn't having any of that. But the truth was, he really was. He was not as good a writer. I don't think anybody would say Carol John Daly was a Dashiell Hammett or a Raymond Chandler or even a John K. Butler. But he had a style. And as a matter of fact, when Mike Hammer came along in the 50s, or in the late 40s, with Mickey Spillane and just set the whole hard-boiled thing on its ear, he wrote Carol John Daly a letter and said that Race Williams was the only character that ever inspired Mike Hammer. So we go back to the 20s for Race Williams, but toward the very end of his life, he shows up in Popular Detective. There's several stories, in Thrilling Detective. He does several stories for Thrilling Detective. And after that, it's like that sort of slow, slow thing. Every career is a bell-shaped curve, isn't it? And so he's on the bell-shaped curve at the bottom.
Yeah, I think ours is getting to that bottom.
Yeah, we're
so.
about there too. And so it's after Thrilling, he was only in a couple of other books. He was in 4 stories in Smashing Detective Stories.
Boy, and that was a real come
which
down.
was a Columbia, not Clayton, Columbia, yeah. And I always heard that he went to comics after the pulps. Is that correct? That Carol John Daly wrote for the comics?
That's the rumor.
That's the rumor. That's the one I wanted to ask. Does anybody know what comics he wrote for?
Yeah.
Could he have been writing for Ned Pines, for the Thrilling Group? We just don't know. But he allegedly, went down, and finally ended up writing for comics, unlike some of the other people who managed to make the jump to paperbacks. He never really made the jump to paperbacks, which even at that time that these Race Williams stories were appearing in 1947, were supplanting the pulps. And yeah.
Yeah, you got to think that these authors were getting to the point where they were making good money prior to the stock market crash, and then suddenly was getting paid, a cent a word. And maybe by the time that he was writing for Columbia, because they were pretty much a half a cent a word or even a quarter cent a word house, that talking about pure desperation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one guy that wasn't desperate, the final guy we're going to talk about tonight, is Stuart Sterling, whose real name was Prentice Winchell. Stuart Sterling, I read I would recommend Ed Hulse's book on the pulps, The Blood and Thunder Guide to Pulps. I just recently read it, and he mentioned that Prentice Winchell, Stuart Sterling, was brought in by Popular to sort of spice up the Phantom Detectives toward the very end of the run in 52 and 53.
Thrilling.
What did I say?
I thought you said Popular.
Yeah, what did I?
Phantom Detective.
Phantom Detective, that's right, I'm sorry. Phantom Detectives. Thank you, John. To spice up the Phantom Detectives, a little bit of vulgarity, maybe a little bit of sex and everything. But the thing about it was, he was already there. He created the last great detective heroes for the Thrilling group. And keep in mind, Stuart Sterling was one of those guys that had a great pedigree. He'd been in Black Mask with those Special Squad stories, which are terrific stories, hold up very well today. He did Fire Marshal Ben Pedley for Black Mask, and also one for Dime Detective, I think. And later on used him as a series character.
Now, was that anything like Fire Marshal Bill?
No, it was not. No Fire Marshal Bill. No, I don't think so. He had a racetrack cop. He had three characters at the very end of the Thrilling run. The racetrack cop, Dean Madden, Keen Madden, hotel detective Gil Vine, and some of you may remember that Stuart Sterling helped a real hotel detective do a book called I Was a House Detective. And I'm sure this helped him do that. And he came at the very end of Thrilling's run, but he kept on, and he got into paperbacks and hardcovers, and he did very well for himself, even though he was there at the very end of the Thrilling run. John, I think that's about all we've got, isn't it?
Yep, I think our time is up.
All right, thank you all very much. We appreciate it.
You've been listening to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the Pulp Net. When your next adventure was just a dime away. Please visit us online at thepulp.net. Thank you for listening, and keep reading the pulps.